Hello and welcome. My name is John Strand from PaulDotCom Enterprises. I'd like to talk to you about some of the really interesting technologies that have been developed in partnership with PaulDotCom and the fine folks at Digital Locksmiths. We're going to talk about some of the active defense technologies that have been implemented in SPEC, which stands for Security, Privacy, Electronic Concierge. Now, before we get into talking about these technologies, we'd like to talk a little bit about why we feel these technologies are so important. And that begins with a question, a very, very simple question. Why is the security industry failing? Well, we can talk about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And a lot of people accuse people in security of saying, well, we're failing, the sky's falling. And they accuse us of trying to make things look worse than they actually are. When in fact, it's much worse than what we're actually saying. And we'll talk about why as we progress throughout this presentation. But the main point that we have to understand is that cyber defense is a visibility game. Now, if you look at any type of organizational conflict, you look at any type of military conflict over the past 2, 3, 10,000 years, whoever has the best visibility tends to be the one that comes out ahead, the one who has the best information, because you'll attack in a way that is more advantageous to you and puts the defender at a greater disadvantage. So let's apply that to computer security. The attackers have great visibility. They can identify all the users in your organization. They can identify your IP addresses. They can identify your services. They can identify the security technology that you're using. And in many situations, they can do this without even throwing a single packet at your organization because they can get it from third-party resources. You're talking about what security technologies you use in your job postings. You can see organizations like Shodan that are crawling the entire internet, collecting all the different technologies that are being used. And then there's services like Salesforce and Jigsaw and Data.com that are collecting email addresses and names for people within organizations. So the attacker has tremendous visibility into your organization without even touching your organization. Now, how does this apply to the defenders? Well, if you look at the defenders, we have very little visibility as a whole. Well, that is until we're attacked. And in many situations, our visibility is extremely limited. In fact, the latest Verizon data breach report that was released for 2012 stated the vast majority of organizations that found out that they were compromised actually found out from third parties. That means their security technologies, IDS, IPS, AV, didn't even detect the attacks, but somebody else detected the attack for them, somebody like law enforcement or another organization that was being attacked downstream. And this has a lot to do with the fact that we have almost the exact same defenses everywhere. Now, to be sure, many organizations use a slightly different AV vendor or a different firewall vendor or a different IDS, IPS vendor, but seriously, think about it. How many AV vendors are there? Really? You got McAfee, you got Symantec, you got Sophos, you got Norton, Kaspersky, but really it's probably about 5 or 6 main AV vendors. Same thing holds true for firewalls and also intrusion detection systems. And this gets to the crux of the issue. A lot of our defensive technologies are becoming commoditized. So if you were an attacker and you knew the defenses for a target organization, how hard would it be to break in? Now, many people would say, I don't know anything about hacking. I don't know anything about computer security. Okay, fair enough. But let's take a look at if it was a nation state. If you're an organization that's working on behalf of a nation and you have millions of dollars at your disposal, or an organized crime organization, do you think it would take a month, a week, a year? The overall point is that the technologies we use are being reused by many, many organizations. And a lot of these technologies are accessible to the defenders as well. So it's time to inject some uncertainty into this overall process. So with Digital Locksmith, PaulDotCom Security Weekly is finally able to bring a product that brings active defenses to organizations. Now, please don't freak out whenever we talk about active defense. There are many, many people that look at active defense and they try to associate it with hacking back. And if you look at any security manual out there today for CIS, S.P.E.C, or Intro to Security, they say hacking back is wrong, hacking back is illegal. We don't cut it that way. Instead, whenever we're looking at active defense technologies, we break it up into 3 separate levels. We have annoyance, basically to force the bad guy to make more moves. And here's why. The more moves a bad guy makes, the greater the probability of us detecting the bad guy. Why? Well, if we can set up a lot of little traps on the outside of our organization and the bad guy falls into these traps, we know a couple of things. One, it's not a standard user that's hitting this. And we can also use it to gauge the overall skill set for the bad guy as well. Basically, annoyance is fantastic because it creates kind of a smokescreen for your organization. Now, some people will say that security through obscurity is no security at all, and they're wrong. Security through obscurity rocks. only if you do it correctly. You see, if you're going to use obscurity, if you're going to use annoyance, you need to make sure that there's some level of alerting that is also enabled. So if the bad guy is running into fake systems or honeypots or infinitely recursive web directories, we need to have some level of alerting to make sure that we know the bad guy is running into these different points. That'll give us higher level of visibility on the bad guy, and it'll make our security incident response procedures far more focused. The next level that we have for active defense with Digital Locksmith is attribution. Who are the attackers? Now, in many organizations, the attackers that'll be approaching you may be nation-state actors. You might not be able to do anything because they're protected under a completely different country like China or Israel, the United States, whoever. But does that mean this information is necessarily worthless? Not necessarily. You see, if you know that you're being attacked by a nation-state, you have much better understanding of what the capabilities of the attacker are. It'll also help you better budget your security defenses for your organization. So there's a tremendous amount of value in attribution as far as who the attackers are. And finally, we actually do offer services relating to hacking back with full attack capabilities as well. Now, we only do this with full legal authority. That means all the appropriate warrants have to be in place, of course. But we do have that capability, and it can be a lot of fun, and it can be incredibly effective if you're using it appropriately. The point is, it's time for something different in computer security. It's time to start looking away from the same stale technologies and keep hoping that our firewalls will finally stop the attacks or our AV will finally stop the attacks. They haven't. We need to start getting creative. Before we go on, I would like to say that all those technologies have their place. IDS, IPS, firewall, AV, they have their place, of course, at stopping the vast majority of the ankle biter script kiddies that exist. However, with a determined attacker, you're going to have a few more tricks up your sleeve to be able to detect and react to them as well. All right, so here's some demos we have for SPEC's active defense capabilities. We're going to talk about annoyance to start out. This is just one of the annoyance features. Now, this isn't everything that we have in SPEC. These are just some of the cooler ones that we thought would really kind of create an impact in a short video format. We have annoyance, infinitely recursive web directories. We have attribution, creating Java applets that can get full attribution as far as where an attacker is. We also have callback Word documents and geolocation documents so we can find exactly where on the planet an attacker is if they get access to one of our documents or an Excel spreadsheet. So let's jump right into the demos. The first one I would like to show you is right here. Now, with this wonderful little website that we have, it's just a proof of concept. However, if you look closely, it's a simple website. However, as I click the links, it brings up more and more text. And if you look very closely in your literature buff, you will see that all of the text is from Alice in Wonderland. Now, this text can be changed. You can make it look like anything. You can change it to be anything that you want it to be. But the point is, as the bad guy goes through and tries to automatically crawl your website, they're going to run into all kinds of different repetitive links again and again and again. Now, what exactly does this do for us as defenders? Well, you would set up this type of technology on a part of your website that your normal users would never go to, but you put it in a section of your website that an attacker would go to. See, in computer security and in web defense, there's something called robots.txt. And what robots.txt does is it tells crawlers like Google, MSN bot, Yahoo bot, what directories to avoid. Now, the reason why you do this is because you don't want Google to index sensitive administrative pages. So you set up these directories, and Google and MSN bot will happily ignore these different directories, and they'll leave them alone. They won't index them. However, for a bad guy, it creates a great big roadmap telling the attacker sensitive data here, and many attackers will go right to those directories. The same is also true for a lot of the automated tools that bad guys tend to use from time to time. So what happens whenever a bad guy uses an automated tool to start crawling through your website? Well, let me show you. So we're going to use a tool that some bad guys use to recursively go through and identify all of the links and all of the input fields on a website. Now, why would an attacker do this? Well, an attacker does this because they want to find all of your input fields, like things like search functions, enter name and date functions, phone number functions. They want to search for all of these different functions on your website in the hopes of finding vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting or finding vulnerabilities like SQL injection. Once they have identified all of these input fields, they'll then move to the phase of actually testing them. Now, this can be very tedious for many web applications. It can take hours to try and do this manually. So what they'll do in many situations is they'll just simply use an automated tool to identify all of the links and all the input fields. So now I'm going to use a simple little tool called wget. All wget does is it simply goes through and it pulls down all of the links associated with a specific site. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use wget to recursively go through and look at all of the directories that exist on the system that's running our wonderful little technologies called Web Labyrinth. All right, now watch what happens. Whenever it runs, you can see that it's just pulling all kinds of random links, tons and tons of random links. In fact, this tool will never, ever finish. I'm going to kill it right now here because I don't want it to run on forever, and I'll show you why in a second. It'll just keep on pulling up more and more links over and over and over and over again. Now, why is this cool? Well, check this out. Whenever an attacker attacks your website with an automated tool, the automated tool is going to create a local copy of the website, or at least it's going to try to index all of the different input fields that exist. In this situation, if the attacker was to use something like wget or W3AF or Acunetics or Burp or Peros or Zattack proxy, these tools will try to identify all of the different links and all of the pages. Unfortunately for them, it's going to create a massive amount of data on their system. You see, for every single link that it pulls down, it's going to create a local copy of that link. We've seen this completely fill up the hard drives of attackers and knock the attackers offline. We've seen this take tools that are commercial, like web tools that run on Windows 7, and completely blue screen Windows systems. Why? Well, the reason why is as these links continue to grow on infinitely, the buffers and the data sets that are holding all of this information grow to a point where it crashes the application and in many situations crashes the attacker's system. Now, this is beautiful, and the reason why it's beautiful is because you're not really hacking back, but you're greatly increasing the amount of time and effort it would take for an attacker to try to successfully compromise your external website. Also, the really most beautiful thing about this type of technology is it's easy to implement. This isn't something that takes years to try to implement or 6 months like you would hear from a Big 5 consulting company. We can install this in your website in a matter of half a day, and then your website is basically protected against bad guys automatically trying to crawl your website to find sensitive data, to find input fields to attack. So really, really cool stuff. Now, the next one I want to show you is a wonderful little bit of code that's been set up that is basically configured to identify, let me minimize that real quick, basically configured to identify an attacker attacking sensitive parts of not only your external website, but also your internal website. We've already covered annoyance, basically creating a whole bunch of links for an attacker that would just recurse on forever and ever and ever and ever. But let's say we wanted to move to the level of attribution. Let's say we wanted to know exactly where that attacker is. How would we go about doing that? Well, here's a wonderful little bit of information that's been created in SPEC. See, if an attacker comes to one of your websites, one of the first things that we like to do for many of our customers is put up a warning banner. Now, this may seem like the absolute most boring thing you would ever see. This is just a default boilerplate warning banner that we've created. This warning banner is important. The reason why it's important is because it's saying things like the company routinely intercepts and monitors communication for this information system. It can be shared with law enforcement, counterintelligence investigations, may inspect and seize data stored on this information system and any systems connected to it. That's important. And also says that reasonable security measures will be taken to validate systems connecting to this information system. Now, as with everybody, they're just going to click OK and they're going to ignore this. But basically, this warning banner has told any attackers that come to this website, hey, we're going to gain access to your system and we're going to validate security configurations on your computer system. Now watch what happens. Whenever we go OK, it just says this is a very enticing page. This can be customized to make it look like anything you want it to look like. And generally, when we're working with the SPEC technologies, with the folks at Digital Locksmith, we spend a tremendous amount of time looking into the psychology of an attacker. What would an attacker want to run? What would an attacker actively run and be excited to run if they ever went to one of your web pages? So we spent a lot of time impersonating things like VPN servers for virtual private networks because attackers love those. That's a direct superhighway right into your organization. or management interfaces for security devices, or management interfaces for firewalls. The point is, you need to make this page look like something the attacker is going to want to run. They're going to want to access. Meanwhile, if the attacker actually runs and accesses this information, in the background, we've got geolocation information on the attacker as well. So here you can see we just ran this information for my system right here, and you can see that it was able to drop a pin right on top of my house with latitude and longitude and accuracy of 127 meters. In fact, it's even more accurate than that. If you were actually in my office with me right now, you would find that my office is right here on this corner of the home, and in fact, my computer is right here where the pin has put me. This is incredibly hyper accurate for identifying the location of attackers. So that's very, very, very cool stuff. But I want to show you what it looks like in production. We actually have an instance of this technology that has been implemented and is actively being used right now, today, in an investigation. What exactly does it look like? Well, in this particular investigation, it was basically an extortion case against a company. An attacker was threatening to do lots of bad things to a target organization. Now, what were we able to do? Well, in this particular instance, we used multiple different types of technology at our disposal to try to identify where the attacker was. We utilized the little applet that we just talked about a couple of seconds ago using SPEC. We also used Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. So we put in some fake data so you can see what actually happens. But here's document. This is showing everywhere that a particular document has opened. Now, in this situation, in the demo data that we have right here, the data has only been opened, of course, for the employees of Digital Locksmith and, of course, PaulDotCom. Now, in this example, this Word document opens, and whenever the Word document opens, it gives us really, really incredible visibility as far as where the attacker is on a specific latitude and longitude point for a map. So I'm going to show you one instance here. That's in Ohio. And once again, this isn't actually going to show you the location of where the bad guy is, but it gives you a good representation of what it looks like. In our case, we were using this to basically send documents to an attacker, and how we got the attacker to take those documents, I should back up a little bit. The attacker compromised a computer system in an organization. And instead of simply eradicating the bad guy from the particular computer system, what we were able to do is actually upload documents onto the system that looked like they were highly sensitive documents, because they knew the bad guy was basically coming back to the system once every 24 hours, looking in certain directories to figure out if there was anything really sensitive. So what we did is we created an Excel spreadsheet that was named something I can't remember. I think it was passwords.xls. And as soon as the bad guy pulled this Excel spreadsheet, it had all kinds of fake, non-existent passwords for external VPN access. And as soon as the bad guy opened this document, we were able to get full attribution as far as where the bad guy was with a very high level of accuracy. And this is an example of what that looks like. So if I switch over to satellite view, in this example, it's one of the employees of Black Hills Information Security. This is his house, and that's exactly where his office was. So by the bad guy pulling the document off of the system that he had compromised on this target organization and pulling that document back to his computer, his or her computer system, and opening that document, we were able to get latitude and longitude for that attacker within an accuracy of 53 meters. Now, once again, this is just an example. I can't actually show you an address of where a bad guy exists. It's under investigation, but it gives you capability to see just how accurate this actually can be with a bad guy running the document. Once again, this really comes back to the concept of psychology, okay? It really, really comes back to psychology. The reason why is if you look at things like Word documents versus Excel spreadsheets. With a Word document, you wouldn't necessarily run macros very often. In fact, many people in security, many attackers, many defenders know that macros in Word documents are very, very dangerous, okay? However, we see macros all of the time in Excel spreadsheets. And attackers pulling down Excel spreadsheets, they love the data, they love what's in it, things like user IDs, passwords, financial information. And if a macro is enabled, the attackers tend to run those macros because they want to see the most accurate representation of that data that exists, because it's very, very valuable for them as a whole. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's open up another document. Now this one's a bit different. This is latitude and longitude from a Word document that doesn't have macros enabled. Because I know that there's people that'll say things like, well, a bad guy is not necessarily going to run a Word document with a macro enabled. They're not necessarily going to run a Excel spreadsheet with a macro. And in this situation, you'd probably be correct in a lot of scenarios. However, this one is a little bit different. See, what this one does is it simply makes an HTTP request. So we don't even have to have macros enabled for Word documents. We can just insert a little snippet of HTTP code within a Word document itself. The reason why this is cool is two reasons. One, they don't have to have macros enabled. So if you're worried about a bad guy being very, very, very paranoid, it doesn't even matter. The bad guy doesn't even have to have macros enabled. Two, the other reason why this is so cool is even though the accuracy is not going to be anywhere near as accurate as a Word document that is triggering with a full macro to find exactly their latitude and longitude, if you look up here, we collect some information that is very important for law enforcement. We have the IP address. That would be the source IP address. Now, geolocation based on IP address is notoriously inaccurate. It can be off in some situations as much as 100 or more miles. But if you look at the source IP address, the source port, and the date timestamp information, with the appropriate warrants, law enforcement can go to that internet service provider, serve the warrant, and the internet service provider can tell you exactly the address where that IP exists. Let me repeat that. With what we call the triplet, the IP address, the source port, and the date timestamp, if you have a warrant working with the FBI or some other law enforcement agency, internet service providers can give you explicit locations and addresses and who's responsible for that bill of that attacker. So even though it doesn't have as high a resolution right off the bat as a macro would in an Excel spreadsheet, it has tremendous capabilities if you're working with law enforcement to find out exactly where the bad guy is who's stealing your sensitive data in your organization. So those are a couple of different things for attribution. So far we've covered annoyance. How can we create infinitely recursive web directories for a bad guy so that their tools will crash, so they won't be successful in trying to attack your website? We have other tricks too, but that's just the one I showed you. We can also get attribution for a bad guy, getting latitude and longitude where the bad guy is. Now, in some situations, you may not be able to do anything. Maybe a nation state, possibly. And in other situations, if it's an attacker in a country that we have reciprocity and memos of understanding with, you can actually work with law enforcement. Can you imagine going to law enforcement and saying, here is the latitude and longitude of the person that attacked our site and did it legally without needing a warrant in the first place? That is incredibly powerful. And that is what we're talking about whenever it comes to turning the tables on a bad guy. Last thing I want to show you is full attack. See, we can go that final mile. We can go that final step, and we can get access to an attacker's computer system. But we only do this if we have full legal authority to do so. That means that you need to have the appropriate warrants in place. So here we have mimicked a router login, okay? Now, once again, this is psychology. A bad guy trying to attack your website. If you say this is a very enticing page, odds are the bad guy's not going to click on anything or run anything from that particular site. However, if an attacker is trying to compromise your system, so this is a Linux system, Backtrack, which is a commonly used attack hacking distribution for good and bad. If the bad guy comes to your site and they see router 3, and they see this particular page, they see it up and running, they think at this point that they're very close to gaining access to this router, getting access to a firewall, getting access to a VPN, and they're going to run any little applets or any technology that comes up on that particular system. So here you can see that this is the attacker's system, and if we come back and we take a look at our computer system, because the attacker has gained access to our page, we were able to successfully counter-hack the bad guy. Here you can see we have full directory listing. Change directories to the desktop. I see their to-do list. You can see that the attackers to do is to hack Google, hack Yahoo, hack Paul.com. Now, if I go back to the bad guy system, you're going to see that we were able to put a file on their desktop called I hacked you. So it shows how we can take these technologies that exist. We can take these technologies that bad guys use, and we can flip it around against the bad guy. We can get full annoyance, basically reducing their capability of successfully compromising your system. We can get attribution and get latitude and longitude within a few meters of where a bad guy exists. And finally, with full legal authorization and warrants in place, we can attack the bad guys as well. So what would the uses for this stuff be? Well, to increase the amount of time it takes to attack your network. Once again, setting off alarms the entire way. We can also use this to aid law enforcement whenever law enforcement is working with you in an incident. As I said, imagine showing up with law enforcement, giving them the exact latitude and longitude of an attacker. Imagine working with law enforcement with an appropriate warrant in place and being able to gain access to a bad guy's computer system. These are the types of things that we've been dreaming about doing in defense forever. It is now capable. We now have the capability. We can turn the tables. Finally, defense is fun again. I'd like to open up this opportunity. If you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to contact Digital Locksmith. Terry Cutler will be happy to work with you. We provided his phone number and his email address there. Also, if you have any questions for me, John Strand, john@paul.com.com, I provided my phone number. Once again, we're very, very happy to be partnering with Digital Locksmith to bring these technologies to fruition, to bring them to organizations all around the world. Thank you very much, and I hope to be talking to you real soon.